Are you ready to hear about some scandals the Catholic Church would rather keep buried? I sure hope so, because today's video is all about forbidden history the Vatican has been hiding. From the Church's involvement in the plot to kill Lincoln, its infamous corpse trial, and the Vatican's ability to profit from the Holocaust, what other secrets might be hiding in the Church's metaphorical closet? Number 10. Century-old secrets. For centuries, the Vatican has held some of the world's most intriguing secrets, with its famous archives containing miles of documents protected by locked doors. Yet surprisingly, Archbishop Sergio Pagano, who's been in charge of the Vatican's archives for 45 years, has decided to pull back the curtain on some hidden tales. In his book, Secretum, he finally reveals a few astonishing stories from inside this legendary vault. One of the most fascinating stories Pagano shares involves the Vatican's ties to the US Church and how they played a critical role in electing a pope in 1922. After Pope Benedict XV passed away, the Vatican was unexpectedly low on funds, leaving officials panicking over how to cover the cost of the conclave. And if you didn't know, the conclave is the gathering at which a new pope is elected. In an almost cinematic twist, a desperate call went out to the Vatican's embassy in Washington asking for every dollar they could send over. And US churches came through, scraping together $210,400.09 to make the election possible. What was the result? Pope Pius XI was elected. This event cemented a financial relationship between the Vatican and US Catholics, something that still exists today. Pagano doesn't shy away from controversial topics either, especially surrounding Pope Pius XII, who served during World War II. Critics argue that Pius XII remained silent about the Holocaust. Some historians say he didn't speak out enough against the Nazis. Pagano agrees with some of this criticism. In the book, he notes that while Pius feared retaliation if he spoke out, he could have said something after the war, especially with the knowledge of what Jewish people endured. Pagano's bold take is unusual in the Vatican, where speaking out critically about a pope, especially one on the path to sainthood, is almost unheard of. Pagano also discusses how the Vatican's archives have been opened more to scholars in recent years. For example, in 2020, Pope Francis released previously sealed records about Pius XII's era. He hoped researchers would finally have access to a more complete picture of Pius's actions and choices during the war. And just to keep things less mysterious, Francis even renamed the archive from the Secret Archive to the Vatican Apostolic Archive. But with 53 miles of shelving, the archives are still packed with documents waiting to be explored. So while some secrets are out, the archives remain a gold mine of untold stories. The most exciting part of Pagano's stories might be the clever spy-like tricks used to hide important documents in the past. In 1810, Napoleon Bonaparte raided the Vatican's archives and took many documents to France. But in a daring move, the chief archivist at the time rolled up a priceless letter from 1530. The letter was from British nobles petitioning the Pope to let King Henry VIII divorce his first wife. The archivist hid it inside a secret drawer in an old chair. Thanks to this trick, Napoleon never found it, and it remains in the Vatican to this day. Blood money. Speaking of the Vatican turning a blind eye to the horrors of the Holocaust, the Vatican Bank also profited from the atrocity. During World War II, the Vatican Bank was not just a quiet institution in the tiny state of Vatican City. It was deeply involved in financial dealings with Nazi Germany. The Vatican had a unique setup, a private bank in the middle of Rome. This bank was immune from Italian law and capable of hiding funds and transactions from other countries, including the US and the UK. But how did it get here? Before Vatican City became its own small nation, the Pope ruled over large parts of Italy, acting as both a religious and political leader. But in 1870, Italian nationalists took over, leaving the Pope with just the land we now know as Vatican City. Suddenly, the Church had to find new ways to fund its vast operations and staff. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the Vatican Bank became central to those operations. During World War II, the Vatican decided to profit from its neutral status and did business with both Allied and Axis forces. However, the bank's connections to German companies raised eyebrows. Author Gerald Posner explains that the Vatican even managed life insurance policies for Jewish people who were sent to concentration camps. When the families tried to collect on these policies after the war, they were told, no death certificate, no payment. This scheme essentially allowed the Vatican to keep the money for itself, which Posner refers to as blood money. Despite knowing the horrors the Nazis were committing, the Vatican hesitated to speak out. They feared retaliation against Catholics in Germany, and possibly even an attack on the Pope himself. By staying silent, they managed to keep their business partnerships intact. But money laundering and secret dealings didn't end after World War II. Throughout the 20th century, the Vatican Bank was often used to hide money. Wealthy Italians or anyone looking to dodge taxes only needed a priest to walk cash across the street into the Vatican. There it could be safely deposited and out of reach from Italian authorities. This made the Vatican Bank a haven for those seeking to evade taxes or launder funds. Today, there have been efforts, especially under Pope Francis, to clean up the Vatican Bank's operations. The Pope has shut down suspicious accounts and is working toward financial transparency. However, whether these changes will last beyond his leadership remains to be seen. Do you think the Vatican should be required to pay money back to the Jewish people for their crooked dealings with Nazi Germany during the Holocaust? Let me know in the comments. The Corpse Trial. In 897 AD, Rome hosted one of the strangest court cases ever. A dead pope, Pope Formosus, was put on trial in an event now known as the Cadaver Synod. Imagine a courtroom where the defendant isn't just absent, but actually deceased, dug up and dressed in his official papal robes. It sounds like some sort of twisted spin-off to Weekend at Bernie's, but for Rome, it was history. So who was Pope Formosus, and what led to this bizarre moment? Formosus had been a respected figure in the church. He was even chosen to spread Christianity in Bulgaria. But his popularity came with consequences. He made both powerful friends and enemies. Back then, being a bishop was as much about politics as it was about faith, especially in a fractured empire. Charlemagne's death left Europe divided, and each faction wanted their man in Rome. Formosus got caught in the crossfire of this power struggle. In 891, Formosus became pope, but he found himself in a tight spot politically. To keep the papal states safe, he reluctantly crowned Guy of Spoleto and his son Lambert as emperors. But he did this just to turn around and support another ruler, Arnulf of Germany, when it suited him. Arnulf even attempted to take Rome to help Formosus, but just as things were looking up, Arnulf fell ill, and Formosus died soon after in 896. Stephen VI was elected the new pope, but he wasn't exactly a fan of Formosus. He had the backing of Lambert, who was eager to restore his family's reputation. Stephen decided that the best way to settle old scores was to put Formosus on trial, even though Formosus was, well, very dead. Formosus's body was exhumed, dressed in papal robes, and seated on a throne in front of a crowd. His charges? Coveting the papacy and holding multiple bishop positions, both seen as power grabs. The dead pope's representative was a terrified deacon who could only stammer in Formosus's defense. In this eerie trial, Stephen allegedly screamed accusations at Formosus's corpse, and as if things weren't already intense, an earthquake shook the courtroom. Can you imagine this? A new pope yelling at a dead pope, and then the earth starts shaking. This did nothing to stop the verdict, though. Formosus was found guilty. Stephen then had the former pope's papal robes stripped off, cut off the fingers Formosus used to bless others, and threw his body into the Tiber River. But the people of Rome were horrified by Stephen's actions. Soon a rumor spread that a fisherman had retrieved Formosus's body from the river, and it was quietly reburied. The people's anger grew until they rioted, imprisoning and ultimately killing Stephen VI. Formosus was finally reburied at St. Peter's Basilica, and his name was cleared, with his decrees reinstated. So why did Stephen go to such extremes? Some say he wanted to erase Formosus's influence and gain favor with Lambert, securing his own position. Others believe Stephen was trying to cover up his own questionable rise to power, since Formosus had granted him his bishop position. Whatever the reason, Stephen's gruesome strategy backfired, proving that even in the medieval church, a good reputation could mean everything, even if it had to be fought for from beyond the grave. And now for a quick break. But first, I wanted to give a shout out and big thank you to Pavel Kopaka and Johan Ardia for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. The Missing Years of Jesus. What really happened to Jesus during his mysterious lost years between the ages of 12 and 30? The Bible skips this part entirely, leading to a flood of theories from the reasonable to the completely out there. Was he in India, Japan, or even the Americas? Listen to this and let me know what you think down below. One of the most popular theories is that Jesus studied in the Himalayas with mystics and yogis. In 1894, Russian aristocrat and journalist Nicholas Notovich claimed to have seen an ancient manuscript, The Life of Saint Issa, at a Tibetan monastery. According to him, this text described Jesus, known as Issa, learning from yogis in India, Nepal, and Tibet. Some claim that Jesus even survived the crucifixion and returned to India, where he was buried. Yet there's no actual evidence, and the mysterious manuscript has stayed suspiciously hidden. Could the church purposely be hiding this text? Then there's the theory that Jesus visited Britain. This idea is fueled by poet William Blake's famous verses, "And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green?" In this story, young Jesus supposedly traveled with Joseph of Arimathea, a tin trader who some believe was his uncle, to study with the Druids in Glastonbury. Some legends say he even built a temple there. A British documentary once suggested that if Jesus had wanted a broad education, including Greek and classical knowledge, Britain was the place to be. But as intriguing as it sounds, there's no archaeological proof. An even wilder theory claims Jesus spent time in Japan. As the story goes, he trained under a Buddhist master, learned Japanese, and later escaped crucifixion by swapping places with his younger brother, Isukiri. Jesus is said to have returned to Japan carrying his brother's ear and a lock of Mary's hair. He supposedly married a Japanese woman, had 3 daughters, grew garlic, and lived until the ripe age of 106 in the village of Shingo. His grave is now a tourist site within this village, and believe it or not, around 20,000 people visit this Christ's hometown each year. Finally, there are tales that Jesus traveled through the Americas. Archaeologist L. Taylor Hansen collected Native American legends describing a white prophet who healed the sick, spoke all languages, and even raised the dead. This mysterious figure sounds a lot like Jesus, and some think he could have been wandering through ancient Peru, Mexico, and North America. But like the other theories, there's no concrete proof, just fascinating folklore. So, did Jesus actually visit these distant lands? Was he a student of mystics, a druid apprentice, or a family man in Japan? Nobody knows for sure, but what do you think? The scandals of His Holiness. The Vatican leaks scandal, also known as VatiLeaks, was one of the most sensational scandals to shake the Catholic Church in 2012. It involved secret letters, hidden threats, corruption at the highest levels, and a butler caught sneaking documents out of the Vatican to expose it all. It all started when a journalist named Gianluigi Nuzzi got hold of some very sensitive letters from a Vatican official, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. These weren't your average letters. They exposed hidden corruption within the Vatican. According to Vigano, some Vatican officials were manipulating contracts, making the church pay way more than necessary. Essentially, they were skimming off the top, and Vigano was not happy about it. He even faced backlash and was removed from his position for blowing the whistle. But things escalated quickly. More documents started leaking to the press, and soon the world learned that the Vatican wasn't just facing financial corruption. There were whispers of bitter power struggles, jealousy, and even rumors about bribery to gain an audience with the Pope himself. In early 2012, an anonymous letter even warned of a death threat against Pope Benedict XVI. It was clear that this wasn't a small issue anymore. It was a full-blown scandal. In May 2012, Nuzzi published a book, His Holiness, The Secret Papers of Benedict XVI, which spilled even more secrets. The book included confidential letters, revealing just how chaotic things were behind the scenes. What did the confidential letters say? Well, among the bombshells were revelations about the Pope's private finances and the shocking cost of Vatican services due to all the corruption. This scandal became front-page news, and it wasn't long before an internal investigation was launched. Pope Benedict appointed a commission of cardinals to dig deep into the Vatican's murky financial and administrative dealings. And boy, did they find dirt. From blackmail plots to whispered rumors of a gay lobby, there was no shortage of secrets lurking in the Vatican's halls. Vatican insiders were talking, and it seemed everyone had something to hide. The scandal continued in May of 2012 when Paolo Gabriele, the Pope's personal butler, was arrested after a police search uncovered classified Vatican documents in his apartment. The Pope's butler? Yep. Gabriele claimed that he leaked the documents to help fight against corruption and put the Vatican on the right track. Some saw him as a hero, but others saw him as a traitor. Gabriele's trial revealed that he believed the Vatican had lost its way, and he thought exposing its secrets was the only way to fix it. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison, but Pope Benedict pardoned him before he served his full sentence. And as if this weren't enough drama, Pope Benedict stunned the world in 2013 by announcing his resignation. Some believe the VatiLeaks scandal played a role in his decision, though he never admitted it outright. His successor, Pope Francis, would later address some of the issues exposed in the scandal, including acknowledging that corruption was present in the Vatican. The Vatican leaks scandal was a wake-up call for the Church and a reminder that even in places seen as holy, people aren't immune to power struggles and corruption. Terrifying angels. Angels, those mystical beings that bridge heaven and earth, aren't exactly the way you picture them. Forget the serene, feather-winged figures you've seen in art. Biblical angels are far stranger, scarier, and sometimes downright bizarre. In fact, if one of these true-to-description angels showed up at your doorstep, you might slam the door in fright. The Bible paints these heavenly beings with descriptions that sound more like creatures from a sci-fi movie than from an art gallery. The most iconic yet eerie of these angels are the cherubim and the seraphim. Now, we tend to think of cherubs as little chubby babies with wings, but in the Bible, cherubim are anything but adorable. The prophet Ezekiel describes them as having 4 faces, one of a man, another of a lion, a third of an ox, and the last of an eagle. 4 faces on one head. And on top of that, they had 4 wings, calf-like feet, and bodies that gleamed like bronze. But the wildest part? They were accompanied by wheels covered in eyes. Yep, that's the cherubim for you. They're definitely not the sweet, pudgy babies we usually see. Then there are the seraphim, known as the fiery ones. These angels are in constant worship of God and have 6 wings. They use 4 of these to cover their bodies, apparently out of reverence for being in God's presence, and fly with the remaining 2. The name Fiery Ones hints that they're often seen blazing with light or fire, which probably explains why they keep a couple of wings handy for shielding purposes. Clearly, these guys aren't your typical winged guardians. And among the strangest angels are the Ophanim, which are also known as thrones. If cherubim were creepy, the Ophanim take it up a notch. They're depicted as massive glowing wheels within wheels covered in eyes. Ophanim are like God's all-seeing surveillance system, keeping watch over creation. These are the top-tier angels, responsible for worshipping and holding up the heavenly throne. But as you go down the hierarchy, angels start to look more human-like. You have the dominions, virtues, and powers, who handle things like controlling the elements, overseeing humanity, and even fighting off any cosmic threats. They're more relatable, perhaps because they sometimes venture to Earth, taking on more familiar forms. In the lowest ranks are the principalities, archangels, and regular angels. These are the angels we are more used to seeing in modern art. They're human-like with a gentle presence. Principalities guard entire nations, while archangels like Michael and Gabriel lead God's missions on Earth. The angels we know best work directly with humans, acting as messengers or protectors. The descriptions of angels in the Bible make it clear why people were often terrified when they showed up. No wonder angels had to begin their greetings with, "Do not be afraid." Whether it's the many-eyed wheels of the Ophanim or the blazing seraphim, these beings would stun anyone who met them. And honestly, who wouldn't be a little spooked if they saw a giant eye-covered wheel rolling by? Jesus Christ versus the Buddha. What if I told you that Jesus Christ and the Buddha might be the same person? Turns out these figures share a lot of surprising similarities. Buddhism began in India around 500 years before Christianity. The two founders' homelands were thousands of miles apart. At a glance, the two figures themselves differed significantly. Jesus, who was central to Christianity, claimed unity with God, whereas the Buddha denied being a deity and urged his followers to seek enlightenment within themselves. Christianity centers on the idea of a supreme being, while Buddhism often doesn't focus on a god at all. Yet the parallels in their lives and teachings are fascinating, almost as if a hidden pattern of mythology underlies both stories. So what's this pattern, and how can these two figures be so similar? Starting with the early life of each, both Jesus and the Buddha left their comfortable homes in search of higher truths that most people never pondered. Their quests for wisdom led them into the wilderness where they each faced temptations, traditionally depicted as 3 challenges. For both, these temptations symbolize struggles with physical desires, spiritual pride, and earthly power. They emerged from these trials ready to teach, and each delivered a famous sermon shortly afterward. For the Buddha, it was the Deer Park Discourse, where he introduced the 4 Noble Truths, laying the foundation of Buddhism. Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, with the Beatitudes outlining a new path for Christian life. Their messages offered followers practical guidance on leading a meaningful existence. Another curious similarity? Both figures chose 12 disciples, only to face betrayal by one of them. Although the Buddha went on to live a full life, each eventually met their end through human actions. What's striking is that they both reportedly forgave those who wronged them before passing on, showing profound compassion at the moment of death. Their final words, too, have a striking resemblance. The Buddha urged his followers, saying, "Be lamps unto yourselves," meaning to seek their own enlightenment. Jesus echoed this sentiment, referring to his followers as the light of the world. Similarly, the Buddha's message of impermanence is matched by Jesus' words, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." It's almost as if their parting wisdom was to guide people towards a truth greater than themselves. Over time, traditions developed around these teachings. The early followers of both men established systems of priests and monks to carry on their legacies. In Buddhist art, the Buddha appears in 3 primary forms: seated in meditation, standing to teach, and reclining as he enters nirvana. These artistic choices parallel traditional depictions of Jesus in Catholicism, praying alone, teaching the masses, or ascending into heaven. And just as Buddhism split into 2 main branches, Theravada and Mahayana, Christianity saw divisions, with Protestant reformers branching out from Catholicism. Both traditions kept evolving as people added new interpretations, shaping different denominations of Buddhism and Christianity alike. These uncanny similarities between Jesus and the Buddha raise an interesting question. Could a common mythological pattern have influenced both stories? What do you think? Number 3. Catholic Church makes fortune in porn business. One of the biggest Catholic-owned publishers in Germany, Weltbild, was rocked by shocking news in 2011. Turns out this publishing giant, which had been purchased by the Catholic Church itself, was selling thousands of risque books. That's not exactly the content you'd expect from a church-backed publisher. But how did this happen? The story began over 40 years ago when the Catholic Church bought Weltbild. Over time, the publisher grew into a major force, eventually becoming Germany's 2nd largest bookseller after Amazon, with around €1.7 billion in annual revenue. This company was no small publishing house. It was a big deal. It employed 6,400 people and offered a huge range of books, including, as it turns out, a whole section of erotic novels with some rather scandalous cover art. In 2011, Buch Report, an industry newsletter, broke the story. Weltbild was selling around 2,500 of these spicy titles. The church's bishops claimed to be surprised by the scandal. They said that a filtering system failure had accidentally allowed these books to slip through. Sure. They then promised to put an end to it. Not everyone bought the "we had no idea" story, though. Bernhard Muller, editor of the Catholic magazine PUR, called the bishop's reaction downright hypocritical. He claimed that this scandal had actually been brewing for over a decade, and the church had known all along. Muller even mentioned a 70-page report that Concerned Catholics had sent to the bishops back in 2008. The report highlighted the risque books and some that allegedly promoted themes like Satanism and magic. And how did the bishops respond? Well, they responded with silence. Back in 2009, the church had tried to sell Weltbild to avoid precisely this kind of embarrassment. But when no buyers offered the right price, the bishops backed out, choosing instead to hold on to this profitable, yet problematic, asset. In the end, the scandal put the church in a tricky position. It left people questioning how such a respected institution could get tangled in such a steamy mess. Do you think this really was just an accident? Or do you think the church knew exactly what it was doing and was only sorry when it got caught? Let me know in the comments. The plot to kill Lincoln. Do you know the true story of Abraham Lincoln's assassination? The tale has no shortage of twists, but one of the most surprising involves a theory that the Vatican and the Catholic Church might have helped in plotting the murder. Didn't see that coming, did you? Let's start with Samuel Mudd, a Maryland doctor and devout Catholic. Mudd had a pretty regular life. On top of being a doctor, he was a farmer and a family man. However, he was also a Southern sympathizer, which was common in Maryland, a border state with divided loyalties during the Civil War. Like many in the South, Mudd supported slavery and blamed Lincoln for the nation's troubles. When Maryland abolished slavery in 1864, Mudd could no longer afford to keep his farm, forcing him to sell the property. He openly criticized Lincoln in letters, calling him a threat to Southern life. This mindset might have been one of the factors that drew Mudd into the orbit of John Wilkes Booth, the famous actor turned presidential assassin. Now here's where things get interesting. Mudd and Booth met in 1864 at St. Mary's Church in Bryantown, Maryland. Their meeting could have been innocent, with Booth claiming he was interested in buying Mudd's farm. But later on, Booth started plotting Lincoln's kidnapping, and he just happened to meet with Mudd several times after this plan began. Was this just a coincidence? Some people aren't so sure. Get this, after Lincoln's assassination, Booth even fled to Mudd's house, where Mudd treated his broken leg, which was likely sustained while escaping from Ford's Theater. So was Mudd an accomplice or just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Historians still debate this. And as if Mudd's involvement wasn't enough, there's the story of Mary Surratt, another Catholic who owned a boarding house in Washington, D.C. Her son, John Surratt Jr., was also close to Booth and shared his Southern sympathies. The Surratt boarding house became a known meeting spot for the conspirators. After Lincoln's death, Mary Surratt was arrested along with 3 others and executed, becoming the first woman in U.S. history to face the gallows. Now I know what you're thinking. So how does the Vatican and Catholic Church fit into all this? Well, after the assassination, rumors spread that Catholic connections in the plot ran deeper than just personal belief. John Surratt Jr. escaped the US authorities and managed to hide out with the help of Catholic priests. He spent time in Canada in a priest's home and even traveled to England and then Italy. There, he joined the Papal Zouaves, a military unit defending the Pope. That's when some Americans started suspecting that these Catholic ties weren't accidental, but instead were signs of a broader conspiracy involving the Catholic Church. Anti-Catholic sentiments in America weren't new. In fact, they'd been simmering for decades. Some Protestant Americans feared that Catholics, especially Jesuits, were secretly working against the US government. To these suspicious minds, the Catholic connections of Booth's associates seemed to confirm their fears. Newspapers and political figures fueled these beliefs. They implied that the Catholic Church might have actually supported Booth's actions as part of some grand plan to undermine the government. But did the Vatican really want Lincoln dead? Well, here's the facts. When the papal authorities learned that John Surratt was hiding in Italy, they arrested him and prepared to extradite him back to the US. So instead of shielding him, they actually handed him over. Surratt, however, managed to escape. Quite dramatically, I might add. He jumped out a window and eluded capture until he eventually returned to the US, where he finally stood trial. He was later acquitted, but his involvement kept the theory alive. So while some connections do look suspicious, most historians argue that there's little evidence to support a Vatican-led conspiracy. What's more, the Catholic Church officially condemned slavery, so it seems unlikely they'd support Lincoln's death over that issue. But hey, maybe that's exactly what the Church wants us to think. Maybe they really were involved in Lincoln's murder and had to cover their tracks afterward. What do you think? The blueprint for deception. The Church would never ask you to lie, would it? Think again. In the early 1960s, a secret document from the Vatican directed Catholic bishops worldwide to handle cases of clergy abuse with the utmost secrecy, or face being thrown out of the Church. The document, called Crimini Sollicitationes, was officially meant to address cases where priests used confession as a way to commit sexual abuse. However, it also addressed other severe misconduct, including abuse involving minors and even more disturbing crimes. Bishops were instructed to keep everything under wraps, and anyone who tried to expose the truth could be excommunicated. This document was sort of like a playbook for covering things up. The bishops enforced strict secrecy, making victims take an oath to stay silent, which kept their stories from being shared with anyone, including the authorities. Lawyers later called it a blueprint for deception, a set of instructions on how to keep the church's scandals locked away. In fact, the document itself was to be stored in the Vatican's secret archives, where the public did not have access. They essentially put a "Do Not Open" label on a box filled with dark secrets. This hidden policy only came to light 40 years later when a Texan lawyer, Daniel Shea, found it while working on abuse cases in the United States. Shea shared the document with U.S. authorities and urged them to investigate whether it had led to a culture of secrecy within the church. He argued that the instructions weren't just meant to protect priests from scandal, but actively worked to silence victims and keep the public from finding out what was going on. British lawyer Richard Scorer, representing abuse victims in the UK, called the document explosive. He also said it exposed a long-standing strategy of concealment within the Catholic Church. Why would the Vatican want this level of secrecy? According to church officials, the document was just a guide for handling accusations with discretion. They claimed that it didn't prohibit victims from reporting abuse to law enforcement. They argued it was intended to protect the dignity of the confessional process. However, lawyers pointed out that the 1962 instruction was enforced globally. It was even reaffirmed in 2001 by a letter from Cardinal Ratzinger, who later became Pope Benedict XVI. The letter confirmed that this policy was still in place and wasn't just an old rule. The document's discovery raised big questions for senior church leaders. One such scandal involved Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, who led the Catholic Church in England and Wales. He was accused of moving an abusive priest, Michael Hill, to a new post instead of reporting him to the police. Murphy O'Connor later apologized and said he had made a mistake, but people wanted to know if his actions were influenced by this Vatican directive. Church spokespersons still argued that this document was misunderstood. They claimed it wasn't about covering up misconduct, but was a legal formality. But many critics believed the document was crafted to keep clergy crimes under wraps, which, according to one US priest, showed the Church's pathological obsession with secrecy. So was this Vatican playbook the smoking gun? It's hard to say, but the document's secret at all costs approach certainly raised eyebrows and left many wondering just how far the Church will go to protect itself. What other secrets do you think the Church might be concealing within its secret archives? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're at it, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.